conversation with.
Hi everyone, welcome to another session of In Conversation With by the Art and Artisans group. I'm Kia Nariman speaking. I'm a bronze sculptor based in New Delhi, India, and I'd like to present to you all Jenny Timmer today. Jenny Timmer lives and works in London. Her art is influenced her art is influenced by her early life and formative years on remote and undeveloped farms, and 3 years more recently in southern Africa. She works in series and installations. Her work is strongly influenced by a spirit of the unscientific mind to produce an impression of an anthropological collection. She wants to represent the essence of human spirit, the evolution of humans over millions of years, and how our common neurological manifests in language, identity, and culture to make meaning from chaos. At Teachers College in Zimbabwe, she majored in art, then did an art history degree at Berwick College, London, and a master's in applied linguistics at the University of Aston, and has been doing art classes half her life. She spent 3 years recently at the Mary Ward Center, updating her skills and perceptions, and finally, or lastly, has completed a master's in fine arts from the University of Arts London in 2018. Welcome, Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us here
Thank you.
today. So I
It's
just
great
like
to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you for coming. We usually just start off with where you grew up and how you really got interested within the art scene.
Yeah, well, until I was 8, from about 3 years old, I don't really remember. My father decided to go tobacco farming. And so it was a very lonely, isolated, we hardly ever saw other people. And I did correspondence school. So the lessons came every week in the post. Um, uh, a lot of what I did at those times was like coloring in, with books, and you have pencils and crayons and things. And so I really enjoyed that. And in order to get me to learn my tables, my times tables, my mother bought a paint box, like, this is the prize when you know. So, art has always been like an important thing to me. And it wasn't until I started school that I realized that actually, compared with other children, there was quite a lot that I could do, and wasn't bad at doing art. So so that's how I kind of got into art. You know, when we were on these farms, quite often we didn't have electricity and we didn't have running water, and you could hear the people who worked on the farm, having like drumming and things like that. So, and you could hear sometimes hyenas and that. So it was quite primeval. And I mean, I'm really still scared of the dark, especially if it's really dark. So, I was interested to explore where all of that came from in my art, because obviously that's a very strong early experience that I've had.
Yeah, absolutely. And from all your sort of experiences and you traveling the globe and living in different parts of the world, you
Yeah,
talk a lot about identity and culture and language. How
yeah.
do you think you've dwelled the two together in your art practice?
Well, when I left Zimbabwe to come to the UK, it was a really political time for Africa, when African countries were trying to become independent of their colonial masters. And in Zimbabwe, the whites held on in southern Rhodesia, where I was, for 10 years after the rest of those countries had got their independence. And I came to Britain during that time, and people challenged me about, like what was happening there. So it was really the first time that I was exposed to other people's views of what my life, we had lots of people working for us, really, for just an ordinary family. We had like 3 or 4 people who work for us. So it helped me to become more to look at things more objectively, like how I grew up, and look at other cultures, and um, I spent like a year in France and I learned French, and that's quite, France was quite a foreign country for me. I mean, it's quite different, and even Paris is quite different from London. And I worked in Poland for a year, just fairly soon after Solidarity. So there were lots of changing attitudes there, people trying to get rich quick and taking shortcuts and things like that. So um, being exposed to those kind of changes and having to see how I was responding to them has given me a space, I guess, to look and see how things are. And in South Africa, I think there are 12 official languages, and there are 2 like white cultures, and within that there are people who are quite advanced, quite liberal, and there's still people who are very conservative. So, and then there are some of the African cultures, although most of them have Christian affinity, they still have traditional practices. So, people would ask me, I work with social workers, like, this woman died of being bewitched, and did I believe in that? So, there were these kind of things, even for educated people who still were questioning, like, if somebody could die from being bewitched. And they would, I knew people who would go and buy charms to protect themselves from envy and jealousy of their neighbors. So that was quite an eye opener for me. So a lot of things were still and still are bubbling underground. And there are things like, plants and trees have special, some of them have special uses and meanings. So I was really interested to find out about that.
Would you say that all of this also played a role into anthropology and the way, I mean, how did that come into your practice?
Um, yeah. Um, I think the real the main impetus to get into this was reading a series of books by a Canadian woman called Jean Ale, who wrote about, do you know them? She wrote about this Stone Age woman who moved around the Europe that was known in those days, and she met different cultures, and she became a shaman and all of these things. And it's she based it on research that was available at the time. So that was very intriguing to me. And then when I came back from South Africa, there was an exhibition at the British Museum of Ice Age art, which just really, was like the material culture from what was being described was there. So I guess that started me really thinking about um, how far back human beings have been interested in portraying their beliefs and their their understanding, in ritual and things like that. So then now I buy the New Scientist, and I cut out the archaeology sections, and I've read quite a lot of books about people who are studying human development. Well, say, yeah, human development. And also, there are other novels. I've just finished reading one by William Golding called The Inheritors, and it's his idea of a group of Neanderthals, and they meet some humans who have taken over their area, and it's a cataclysmic defeat of the Neanderthal group. So I find those kind of things quite intriguing, how people um, try and understand how things were for other human beings who have exactly the same mental capacity that we have, but they don't have the knowledge of science and things like that.
I'm actually reading Humankind right now. There's a book by Rutger Bergman. I'm not sure
Right.
if it's quite down your alley, but it actually speaks of the goodness of human beings and how
Right. Yeah.
people are good. It's actually really fascinating. So I don't know if that'll help you in your
Okay, I'm going to write that down. Who is it by?
yeah. Rutger,
Yeah.
Rutger,
Yeah.
Bergman,
Bergman. Okay.
Bergman, if I'm not mistaken.
Just one N.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can. Yeah, I mean, what did you find in that?
So far, it's been fascinating because it speaks of the goodness of people, and he actually takes you through various historical events
Right.
on how fundamentally people were there to aid other people and help other people, and how fundamentally people are good. And at a time like
Yeah.
COVID, it's so nice because
Yeah.
you just think of despair and everything else. So reading a book like
Yeah.
that really helps. It just
Yeah.
restores your hope of humanity and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you also find that, see, a lot of your art is installation art? Is
Yeah.
that a specific medium that you've chosen because of everything you'd like to show, or are you open to different kinds of mediums, or is it because you found another artist that did it and therefore you got inspired?
Um, well, I mean, the work I was doing like before I started the Mary Ward courses, I was doing work on paper, mixed media. And it wasn't really, I didn't do it to kind of like develop my ideas. It was a more recreational thing. After a hard week, I'd go in on a Saturday and I'd just be able to play with color and texture and things like that. So that's how it was for me. And the tutor was always trying to make me like think about it more, but I didn't really want to do that. So um, when I came back from South Africa, and I did a pre-foundation course, and we had a sculptor running it. And so she introduced us to plaster casting and things like that. And I went one day when I went to Tate Modern, there was an installation by a French artist who is my age called Annette Messager. And the Tate had bought this work, which is called The Pikes. And it's a whole lot of poles, probably about 100, that were around the corner of this gallery, and um, they have things hanging from them. Some are pictures, like children's pictures, but there are also things like teddy bears with colored pencils pushed through them. It's kind of quite macabre. Faces hanging. It looks like they're black stockings. Bits of stuffed toy limbs and things like that sort of piled on. And to me, it was a really powerful comment, I think, on human, like pikes we used for putting people's heads on for, transgressors from, I mean, they've been discovered in archaeological times, but also, in like 400-500 years ago, traitors were treated like that. Heads were chopped off and they were put up for, to to um, to stop people from, to be an example. So it had that kind of um, um, anthropological references, but also using these children's things. It was really quite provoking. Like, was she trying to say, like, we have this in us, this need to be cruel, or was she saying, it was about child, like not looking after children properly? And so the way it made me think, and um, it just made me interested in what can happen with three-dimensional art. So when I applied to Wimbledon, I think I was accepted because I had started to experiment with installations. And in fact, the tutor said to me when I brought some things on paper once, which were just things I was trying to work out, she said, you don't want to do 2D, you want to do 3D. So, she really set me down that way. Um, so I haven't really developed the 2D side of things since then. And I find 3D is a very good way to put objects together, to put materials together, to bring different associations, see how they work together and set up new reverberations. Um, and you know, most things already have a meaning, so how you can change it when you put it next to something else. And I like to think about how I can set these things, like, you know, how do I display it, because that's quite an important aspect. So like from this, you know, from this, Mark Dion I found very useful, because he has a similar idea to material culture, and he sets things up in cabinets, like office spaces and things like that. So that really extended my understanding. And then he was interested in cabinets of curiosity, and he makes them, you know, and he goes into a university, they invite him in, and he goes around all the departments and he takes objects and then he reconfigures it into something else. So he was quite seminal in me looking at how I could put things together in different ways, and how I should think about displaying them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I saw some of his work in London, so it's fascinating. So I really like
Did
his.
you go to the Whitechapel exhibition?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're so, like you were saying, I think you just said that your masters actually put you into the course of 3D,
Yeah.
going to 3D. So your education's clearly played a very large part in your studies, or even where you've gone down with it. You've got a double
Yeah.
bachelor's. I think you've got 5 degrees, if I'm not mistaken, in total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got 3 degrees, you know, like one bachelor's and 2 masters. So
Yeah.
the rest is other stuff. Yeah.
Other stuff, yes. Which is also,
Yeah.
yeah. So, what made you continue down the path of education? Did you feel like you just had so much more to learn, or was it something there, or
Kind
and
of, yeah, I
yeah,
know. I think, you know, when I left school, I really didn't want to study. And, you know, in Zimbabwe, um, for women, there weren't very many opportunities. You know, you could be a nurse, you could do secretarial work, or you could go and work in a bank or a shop. Those were open to us more or less. So I went to a secretarial college, but I never really had a secretarial job that I liked, but it was always very useful, you know, like when I needed to earn a living to get an office job. And I mean, you know, I think I went 3 or 4 times to see career advisors to try and find a way of, you know, like doing something that I really enjoyed. So in many ways, the education was to help my life just feel a little bit less pointless. So, you know, I did, and I found things that I could do part-time. I didn't have to give up work to do them. So the history of art was at Birkbeck College, which is only evening classes. And I found there, I became very interested in medieval art and medieval sculpture and iconography, you know, like what sort of the meanings of some of the things that were brought into these pieces. So I guess that was one of the original things that set me up looking at non-scientific thinking and how artists brought in into their work something that uh, had a question that you had to try and undo, try and find what they were trying to say. So then I had a job working in an organization that helped language teachers. And then I discovered that I could be a language teacher. So I did the course part-time, and then I got more and more interested in it, especially like motivations and how people who were prepared to let go of their own identity and be a little bit more, you know, allow themselves to form words in a different way from their own language and to take on a different identity, help them to be more successful in learning that language, you know. And I found there's some people, like the Polish people, although they'd never met an English speaking person, a lot of them could speak really, really good English, you know, and Swedes are also very good at learning other languages. So that was quite interesting. Then there are other people who are like much more shy, and it was more difficult. So those are sort of things that I was interested in. And then the way to move on in that was to do a master's. And I because I wanted to work in a university sort of setting. And I found one that I could do over 2 years, you know, like distance learning. So, and then when I'd done that, and then I went to Poland, then I came back and I did a bit of work for a couple of years, well, about 4 or 5 years or something in university level. But yeah, then, you know, then I just kind of got a bit tired of it. I was more interested in children, working with children therapeutically. So then I went down that way. And then that's why I went out to South Africa. I wanted to see if I could, if I could settle there, because I just find the English climate really quite tedious. But I just found that I didn't have friends my own age who I felt, you know, like I really felt comfortable with. And I met some British people and I just found, oh, we got on really well. So I thought, okay, fine, I'm British now, you know, so let's just not fight against that. And so then I came back and I realized I could do these programs of art. So then I got started, and the tutors really encouraged me to not just think, okay, I'm just going to do this weekends, but to just take it further, you know. So so then I went to Wimbledon and I really, really enjoyed it there. I mean, at first I wondered what I was doing there, but as soon as we had the introduction to the sculpture workshop, I thought, okay, right, I'm here now. I know what I'm doing. So you know, then that really helped me to settle there and engage with the things. So yeah, I kind of feel like it took me a whole lifetime from when I left school to get back, but it's not like wasted, because lots of things fed in, lots of experience, you know, and probably a lot of things I've become interested in come from, you know, all that long detour. So it's pity, it's just like, you know, I mean, I had my 71st birthday when I just started at Wimbledon. So, you know, it kind of feels like that's a long time to get to that point, but I really enjoyed being at Wimbledon. Yes.
That's really nice. Yeah. And
Yeah,
do you find that the all the education and everything that you've learned from your various colleges has
yeah,
put you on a path of, like you said, you're interested now with therapy and with children, and that's the path you want to go down. Do you find that it's in a way helped you conduct your career in a certain way, or it's something that you've just found there, or
I think, you know, the working with children was a bit that I did, and then when I went to South Africa, um, you know, I find a lot of African children, because they are brought up to start working and looking after their siblings and that when they're quite young, they don't really have a play culture. You know, you put them in a room with toys and they just reenact real things. They find it very difficult to make up stories. So I found it quite hard to work therapeutically with the children, because there wasn't a way I could find to facilitate imaginative play in which they would be able to work out, you know, the things that had happened to them. You know, mostly had been um, they had been orphaned by AIDS, HIV AIDS, or murder or something like that. You know, I mean, I found it easier to talk to young girls who were getting really angry with their foster parents, and their bereavements had never been addressed, and you know, and then if you engaged with that and they could talk about it and they could reflect on it, that was more, you know, that's where it felt like I could do more for those children than the young ones, where they didn't have the facility to engage in imaginative play. But you know, that was like the end of the therapy thing. You know, then I came back and I did art. So the therapy fed in, you know, and I'm still quite interested in our psychological development and how we develop our identities and things like that. But it's not my main way I want to spend my career. You know, I want to be an artist,
right?
and I want to see. see, what did I write here? You know, I want to help people understand what makes us human, raise questions, you know, not just tell them like shouting, this is what you know, this is how you need to be. Like I just found this something I'd written down recently, which was by Francis Bacon, you know, the painter. How do you show reality without illustrating? So for me, that's always like, you know, to get one step behind the illustration so that it's not totally obvious what you're saying, but people have to question it a bit. And I think the installation is the best, for me, the best way to be able to like set up those things to make people think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Wimbledon really encouraged us also to collaborate with our fellow artists. So we had
Yeah.
shows and things like that. How have your experiences been collaborating with your fellow artists, and do you think it's taught you something? Meaning, taught you something about yourself as an artist, or just how important do you find it?
I think what it's taught me is that I find it easier working on my own. I think, you know, it's possible to learn a lot from working with other artists. And I have two ongoing collaborations with some artists for, you know, for a gallery in Portugal that a friend of mine set up, and she had to cancel all the, you know, all the exhibitions. And so she asked us to work with collaborations. Um, and I, you know, I think with some people who have more of like the mind that I have to explore the things that I'm interested in, it's much easier, you know, um, to um, to work with somebody who's coming from a different direction and maybe doesn't have the same like imaginative way of working or seeing possibilities and things, but wants things to be more set out, can be quite tricky, you know. So, you know, I think there are also things like you have to be clear about how you're going to use the resources, like how the, you know, if you're spending money, how that's accounted for, you know, and I think intergenerational and intercultural things can be quite important here if you haven't sorted it out, because there can be misunderstandings and people feel like maybe they weren't heard, or the other person isn't being flexible enough. You know, I mean, I think there are all kinds of pitfalls that you have to try and be open to the other person and find out how you can get along. I mean, I just think it's quite tricky.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
It's almost taught you that you'd like to be alone and like to be
yeah,
at.
and I think because I'm older, you know, that most artists are younger, and they're completely different skills and ways of looking at things than, you know, from like where I come from, you know. So, you know, unless you can really get a good understanding on how you're going to work together, I mean, I think it can be quite stressful.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Also, you told us what your goal as an artist is, but what really keeps you motivated and keeps you going?
I think I like um, I find things that I see on TV or on the news create questions in my mind, you know, like at one stage I was reading a lot about, you know, how women in India, I mean, it happens everywhere, but it was in the news. A young student was on a bus with her boyfriend, and she got raped by quite a few people, you know, and just that sort of like set me up thinking, okay, like, you know, how would I work with this, you know?
Talking about the Nirbhaya case?
I can't remember her name. It was about 7 or 8 years ago. You know, but it happens everywhere. You know, it happens. So I'm interested in that sort of patriarchy and how we, you know, how women are trying to gain their place and their voice and things. You know, like Arundhati Roy, I'm a really big fan of hers. She just wrote a very long article about how India has come to be in the situation it is, which I found very moving. It's in the Guardian week, you know, the Guardian last week.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I know she's an activist, and but I'm sure she doesn't have an easy life. I mean, I don't really know much about her life. I read the God of Small Things, and then if she, you know, if I read anything by her, I'm always very impressed. So there are things like that, or it might be the refugee crisis, or it might be, you know, I saw something recently about forest tribes, and when they go out hunting, they don't stay together, but they have a way of leaving messages for each other by cutting sticks and then sticking bits of grass and twigs in and tying it in different ways. And it has, and so they can communicate by that sort of means. So, you know, so then I record that. I have a lot of little black books like this, and I have it by the television. So then I write down things that I'm interested in. I mean, I don't use all of them, but you know, so I'm just really interested in being provocative. And quite often when I start something, I might not see totally where it's going at the beginning. It might just be a material thing I'm doing, but then I'll see, okay, well, this has some kind of a political overtone, you know. And one of the things that, you know, that Edwina at Wimbledon said to me, you're not a political artist, but there's a lot of political in your art. And I think that's because of the, you know, because of the psychological and social and economic things that I'm, you know, that I'm concerned about, that I try not to make that divert, you know, like totally obvious. But, you know, I see the reverberations in my art. So I just want to keep on like showing people a way of looking at reality from a different point of view, and making them question, you know, whatever.
That's really nice. Considering it's taken you almost 70 years to get to where you finally really want to be. Any last words, especially for young budding artists or people that are unsure of where they're going?
Yeah. Well, you know, I was offered, when I finished at Wimbledon, I did a life drawing class, and I was offered a 4-year part-time course, foundation degree. And I just thought, oh, I just can't carry on being poor. You know, I need to like, you know, I don't want to live from hand to mouth for 4 more years, you know, like going and packing eggs, you know, for the weekend or something. But, you know, now I sometimes wish that I had, you know, I think always for artists, there's like, how are you going to um, earn your living? You know, because it's quite difficult to sell art unless you do it in a way that's very accessible to people, and that might not really be the kind of art you want to do. So I think we always, you know, for artists, and unless you win prizes and, you know, and things like that, you're stuck. Like, well, I'm going to have to go to work. Um, so I think, you know, I would just say, like, try and not be, you know, I kind of wish I had taken that opportunity. That was in the mid 80s. So, you know, quite a good time before when I really came back to it. But I think is just keep trying to put yourself out there, you know, proposing for exhibitions and things. It might not be the Turner Prize, but to see your art and people looking at your art is very rewarding. So I think it's just to try and keep doing that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks, Renee.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.